Welcome to the Stagecoach, where you'll find the best Western books on the market and the men and women who write them. This podcast is brought to you by Dusty Saddles Publishing, home of the best-selling authors in the Western genre. This is your host, Ginger Winters. Join us as we continue the story of Where the Wind Takes You by LeRoy A. Peters.
Chapter 16. Hidatsa Summer. After the propelling of the Blackfeet and the birth of Catherine Lightshines, life returned to normal in the village of Yellow Wolf. Running Moon had made a quick recovery from her delivery, and a couple of days later she was up and running again. Isaiah had talked with Jacques and Pierre about their beaver plues from last winter and spring, and he decided that they should head to St. Louis to sell their plues and trade supplies for the upcoming winter and spring seasons without him. Isaiah and Running Moon had planned to keep their promise to Whitebird to take her to visit her people, and explain to them about her ordeal and how the mighty yellow hair of the Assiniboine saved her from the Gros Ventre. At least that is how she described him. "You will not come with us to St. Louis, mon ami?" asked Jacques. "The Hidatsa nation is right on the way." "Be that as it may, Running Moon and I want to spend time with Whitebird's people," said Isaiah. "It'll help me practice my Hidatsa better." "Not to mention it might help you build a strong relationship with the Hidatsa," said Cypher's Bird Woman. She, Shooting Star Woman, and the girls were going to accompany Jacques and Pierre to St. Louis. She hadn't been there in quite some time. Pierre wanted to show Shooting Star Woman how white people lived, and since their baby wasn't due to come until the end of fall, neither was worried. "My wife is correct," said Jacques. "Since you have a wife among the Assiniboine and one among the Hidatsa, it will be easier for you when it comes to developing trade relationships between the two tribes." "I never thought of it like that," said Isaiah. "How come you never took a second wife?" Cypher's Bird Woman answered on behalf of her husband. "I am not sharing something that good with another woman, or anyone else for that matter." The Frenchman turned beet red but was smart enough to remain silent. Isaiah, Pierre, and the women guffawed. Isaiah thought a lot about what had transpired in the previous year. He never had any intention of taking a second wife. In fact, he never had any intention of leaving South Carolina and coming out west to be a trapper and marry an Indian woman. Let alone two. "Strange how things work out," he thought to himself. He looked at Running Moon as she was finished feeding their newborn daughter. He couldn't believe he was a father, and he was amazed and relieved at how quickly the baby was growing. It appeared, at least to him, she was getting stronger. He also looked at Whitebird as she was getting prepared for their journey to see her people. He and Running Moon had learned a lot about her since he reluctantly took her as a second wife a few months prior. She had celebrated her 18th winter not long before her capture at the hands of the Gros Ventre, which made her a year older than Isaiah and Running Moon. She was very close to her parents, so when they were killed, the strange yellow-haired white man who lives among the Assiniboine and his wife became her family. While she missed her parents greatly, Isaiah and Running Moon, even the Ledoux, had become a source of great comfort for her in her time of mourning. She and Running Moon, along with Shooting Star Woman, had become best friends, as she picked up learning their language, almost like sisters, while Cypher's Bird Woman had become a surrogate mother. While Isaiah's Hidatsa wasn't as good as his Assiniboine, he never stopped learning it and often spoke with Whitebird both in public and private any chance he could. He had become proud of her as he was proud of Running Moon, and she had grown happy to be with her new man and her new family. The next morning, the two families mounted up after breakfast. Jacques and Pierre had informed Chief Yellow Wolf that they were going to the Hidatsa Nation, where Isaiah, Running Moon, and the Whitebird would be staying for the whole summer. He and the rest of the family would continue east towards the land of the whites called St. Louis and would return by fall. The chief understood and wished them well. He told Pierre to look after his daughter and future grandchild. Pierre promised to protect them with his life. Isaiah, Running Moon, and Whitebird also said their goodbyes to Running Moon's parents and brother. Little Feather held her granddaughter for as long as she could and kissed her on the forehead before giving her back to her parents. Isaiah could see the sadness in his mother-in-law. "We won't be going far," he said to Wolf's Paw and Assiniboine. "We will return before you know it, I know, said Wolf's Paw. Just be careful, Yellow Hair. You have enemies now who will want your scalp. Father's right, said Stalking Bear. The Blackfeet and the Gross Venture are not the only enemies you have to watch out for. Who else? Asked Isaiah. Arakawa and the Lakota, answered Stalking Bear. They may be enemies to each other, but they are not too fond of white men coming through their country. I thought the Arakawa and the Hidatsa were friends, said Isaiah. His in-laws just shrugged. That doesn't mean they are our friends, said Wolf's Paw. I trust the Hidatsa, but you can never tell with the Arakawa. And the Sioux have been our enemies as long as the Crow and Gross Venture have, said Stalking Bear. Always be on the lookout, my brother. This is what we keep telling him, said Jacques in Assiniboine. Keep your eyes on the horizon and your nose to the wind, and you might just live to see the next day. Since when did you become so poetic? Asked Isaiah. The benefits of having a privileged childhood education, said Jacques. Now, let us be on the way, mon ami. Where the two families were heading out after they left the Assiniboine village of Yellow Wolf was on the Knife River, a tributary of the upper Missouri River in what is now north-central North Dakota. It would take at least a couple days to a week of riding from the Big Sheep Mountains to get there. The Knife River was where Whitebird's village was and where she was born. The Hidatsa had lived there among the neighbors and allies, the Mandans, for hundreds of years. The alliance helped protect them from their main enemies, the Lakota or Sioux. When the Gross Venture attacked her village and killed her parents, capturing her, it was a huge shock, for the Gross Venture weren't known to travel that far east of their home territory. However, like most tribes in the northern plains, the Gross Venture were nomadic and went and raided wherever they pleased. Whitebird was excited to be returning home. Even though she had no longer had an immediate family, she still had friends. The fact it was summer made things a bit easier, but everyone still had to be on their guard, because summer was when tribes would raid each other for other horses, captives, or whatever they could find. Jacques took the lead, for he had traveled through Hidatsa country on many occasions. Once certain landmarks became recognizable to Whitebird, he would let her take the lead. Pierre kept a watch on the rear guard of their little caravan, while Shooting Starwoman, Marie, and Lizette helped pull the pack horses that carried the Plews and their lodges. Isaiah, Running Moon, and Cypher's Birdwoman rode in the center, with Isaiah riding on the outside to keep an eye out. Everyone was well armed, including the women, except for baby Catherine Lightshines. She lay comfortably in the cradle carrier her mother carried over her back. Her grandmother made the cradle in the style and tradition of her people, and the baby was awake but quiet as she was aware of her surroundings. This was something that her parents noticed and were amazed that one so small and so young could be so attentive. By the end of the first day, they covered 20 miles, not trying to push it. Pierre went hunting after the lodges were up and the camp was set. Using his bow and arrow instead of his rifle, he managed to take down a yearling white-tailed deer, a buck. Shooting Starwoman and the girls immediately got to work and managed to have the animal skinned and gutted in no time. Isaiah tended to the horses, allowing them to feed on fresh grass, but staked them together not far from camp. He didn't want any visitors of either the two-legged or four-legged variety to cause them to disappear while everyone was asleep. Cypher's Birdwoman had the coffee going, and before long everyone was feasting on deer, biscuits, and some beans that Jacques had always kept among his supplies. The Frenchman was very fond of beans and said that they were healthy, and a man cannot live on meat alone. Around the campfire, Whitebird and a mixture of Hidatsa, Assiniboine, French, and English, as well as sign language, managed to explain how her people grew squash and other vegetables, like their banded allies. While the tribe was nomadic, they did live in earthen mounds along the Knife River. Their territory stretched along the Missouri River and its tributaries west towards what is now the state of Montana, to the northeast where the Mouse River and the Devil's Lake are, in what is now North Dakota. "We shall reach the Knife River in a couple of days," said Jacques, "barring any delays." "I am looking forward to it," said Isaiah as he gently held Lightshines in his arms. "It is going to be a very interesting summer, but it won't be the same without you." "Don't fret, mon ami," said Jacques. "We will be back before you know it." "With plenty of supplies and food for our friends and families," added Pierre. "Until then," said Cypher's bird woman. "You have 2 lovely wives to keep you occupied." Isaiah grinned as he sat between Running Moon and Whitebird, who rested their heads, one on each shoulder. How did I get so lucky? Chapter 17. Home is where the heart is. A few days later, the group arrived at the Hidatsa village of Chief Longtime Dog. Like most Indian tribes of the northern plains, the Hidatsa didn't have a single chief who governed the entire tribal nation, but a council of many chiefs who decided and acted on behalf of the people. But they did have a leader who the people would follow, and Longtime Dog was such a leader. He immediately recognized Whitebird, who led the group into the center of the village, and was both surprised and happy to see her. While he was no kin of hers, he was a good friend of her parents, and despite his best efforts to find her after the Grossventure attack, he had given her up for lost. As Isaiah helped Whitebird down from her horse, she was greeted by her chief, whom she called Uncle out of respect. "It is good to see you," said Longtime Dog. "We all thought you were lost." Whitebird grabbed Isaiah by the arm and pulled him towards her chief.
"This white man and his friends saved me from the Grossventure," she said. "His name is Yellowhair of the Assiniboine, and he is now my husband. This is also his wife, Running Moon of the Assiniboine."
Longtime Dog welcomed Isaiah and his family to the village. Isaiah, through both sign language and some Hidatsa, introduced Jacques and his family to the chief and told him that they were truly honored to be there. "We welcome all of you to our village," said Longtime Dog. "We are forever in your debt for what you have done for Whitebird." Longtime Dog turned to Whitebird to inform her about her parents. "We buried your mother and father not long after the attack."
"I thank you, Uncle,"
said Whitebird as a tear trickled down her cheek.
"Will you take me to them?"
The chief nodded. He had some of the village boys who guarded the horse herd tend to the visitors' horses and belongings. Whitebird asked Isaiah and Running Moon if they would accompany her to the funeral scaffold of her parents. They both nodded, while the Ledoux stayed in the village. As they arrived at the funeral scaffold, Whitebird was in tears, chanting in her native Hidatsa in accordance with the customs of her people. Isaiah and Running Moon both knew how hard this was for her. Both were close to their parents, and as far as Isaiah knew, his parents were still alive, though he wasn't sure. Running Moon hoped and prayed that her parents lived to a ripe old age, but she was also a realist. She knew it was the way of things in the wilderness, and that death had no timetable and no prejudice when it came to age, skin color, or circumstances. Her father always told her it was all part of this journey we call life, and we were meant to endure it until the end. However, it was what we did on that journey that mattered. Running Moon and Whitebird had become like sisters. When Whitebird finished her chant in mourning, Isaiah and Running Moon approached her, the latter holding light shines in her arms. She gave the infant to Whitebird to present to her late parents as their grandchild. Whitebird was eternally grateful for this and showed light shines to her parents. Isaiah smiled, though he too began to cry a little. His heart hurt for Whitebird, but he was also proud of what Running Moon had done. While he and Whitebird had yet to have a child together, he considered her to be a mother to Catherine Lightshines as well. He wasn't sure if he believed in the religious beliefs of either the Assiniboine or the Hidatsa, but he definitely had respect for them, thanks to his wives. As he got to know both tribes, he learned that their traditions and even their entire cultures were not that different from his own. The problem was trying to convince most white people, especially those claiming to be Christians, of that. While Isaiah might have been young, he was far from naive. He knew most whites considered Indians to be nothing more than godless, savage heathens, when in reality they were the exact opposite. He often wondered what his family would think or feel about Running Moon, Whitebird, and their daughter. Even though he believed he would never see his relatives again, that didn't mean he didn't think of them. Despite the fact that his parents taught him to treat people as people, regardless of skin color, and that slavery was evil, that didn't mean they were strong supporters in the mixing of races and cultures. It was at that moment Isaiah felt the pain in his heart for his 2 wives and his daughter. Even though he hadn't been with his wives long, he had grown strongly in love with both of them, and he was proud to be married to them, despite not having much of a choice in the matter. He had no regrets, and his daughter was his pride and joy. While he missed his parents and siblings greatly, He loved his family here, and he would never leave them, not if he could help it. He had become close to Jacques Ledoux and his family as well. The Frenchman had become not just a mentor, but like a second father to Isaiah, while Pierre had become an adopted brother. Lisette and Marie were the little sisters he never had, and Cypher's birdwoman had become like a second mother to him. He was grateful for how his life turned out, and there was no room in it for regrets, at least not when it came to his new family. Isaiah bowed his head to say his silent prayer. Lord, it has been a long time, but I would be a fool if I didn't say thank you for everything, especially how my life has turned out. What I need from you is the strength, patience, and wisdom in being a husband and father, and, more importantly, a friend. I can't ask for no more than that. Amen. By the time he lifted his head, Isaiah was staring at his 2 wives and longtime dog, who thought the young white man was possessed.
Praying?
Asked Running Moon. She had seen Isaiah do that a couple of times since they had been married. He smiled and nodded. Praying for our family. Running Moon beamed with pride and translated in Hidatsa what Isaiah had said and what he was doing. Longtime Dog looked approvingly at Isaiah. A man who communicates with the Great Spirit over anything is a wise man. I have never considered myself a wise man, said Isaiah through sign, but I was praying for wisdom. Longtime Dog laughed. You have chosen wisely in taking this man as your husband, he said to Whitebird. She beamed with pride as she still held Lightshines in her arms. She looked into the eyes of her baby that she didn't give birth to, but she was honored that both Yellowhair and Running Moon would include her as a baby's second mother.
I want to give you a baby like Running Moon,
she said suddenly to Isaiah. He gently stroked her cheek, where tears had just been, and said, In due time, the Creator will decide when we are ready. He kissed her, and then he kissed Running Moon as he walked with them back to the village, with an arm around each of them. Later that night, at dinner in the village, Jacques, Pierre, and their wives informed Isaiah and the women that they were leaving for St. Louis in the morning. You're sure you do not want to accompany us? Asked Jacques. I will be fine, said Isaiah. Running Moon and I need to get to know Whitebird's people. That is very smart, said Pierre. Definitely an opportunity to open trade, considering that our 2 tribes have traded with each other. Instead of warring with each other, makes things a lot easier. I am concerned about all of you, said Isaiah. St. Louis is still a long way. Touché, mon ami, said Jacques, but it can't be helped. Manuel Lisa may have been the only fur trader trying to build a fort on the Yellowstone, but there were many forts up and down the Missouri River, though Jacques preferred to sell his blues in St. Louis for better prices that he could receive at any of the frontier forts. Well, I have you all in my prayers, said Isaiah. Before we left St. Louis last summer, I opened a bank account. I trust you will deposit my share of the money into it. Of course, mon ami, said Jacques. Do you even need to ask? Isaiah laughed and shook his head.
Come back soon, said Running Moon. Do not worry, Running Moon, said Cypher's birdwoman and a Cinderone. We shall return before fall, and be home before the snow falls. Home, said Jacques. Do you ever think of your home in South Carolina, Isaiah?
Isaiah pondered the question for a moment, then looked at Running Moon and Whitebird and the baby. He turned his attention towards his friends. I think of those I left behind, he finally said, but I no longer think of it as my home. You don't, eh? Nope, said Isaiah. Home is where the heart is. And my heart is with these 2 beautiful women and this bouncing baby girl. Running Moon and Whitebird smiled with joy at that statement, but he was not done yet. Home is where you and your family are as well. Lisette and Marie giggled. Their brother and parents beamed with pride. And Shooting Star Woman was smiling. To hear such words, mon ami, said Jacques. It moves me with great pride. At that, Jacques got up and gave Isaiah a huge bear hug and a kiss on each side of his cheek. Everyone laughed at Isaiah's discomfort, because he seemed to think he had just been violated. After dinner, and when everyone was ready to call it in, Isaiah, Running Moon, and Whitebird retired to their teepee that they set up. Isaiah already had out the buffalo robes when Running Moon took Catherine Lightshines and was on her way out of the lodge. Where are you going? He asked.
We will stay with Shooting Star Woman and Pierre tonight, said Running Moon. Whitebird needs you.
Isaiah had a surprised look on his face as his first wife, along with their baby girl, left their lodge, and Whitebird came in. While she and Isaiah had made love before since he took her as a second wife, the occasions were few and far between compared to how much he and Running Moon made love. Isaiah was still getting used to having two wives. The fact that they got along made things very easy. It wasn't that he didn't love Whitebird. He was still trying to get to know her better. His Hidatsa had not been all that great compared to his Assiniboine, though he hoped that would change, but for now, words in any language did not need to be spoken. It was no secret that Whitebird wanted to have his baby, nor was it any secret that they both enjoyed trying to make one. It was that Running Moon was his first wife, the first woman he ever had sex with, and he loved her too, no more or no less than he loved Whitebird, but he enjoyed her company. Running Moon wanted Whitebird to be happy, as she was happy, and having Isaiah's baby she knew too well would be a great joy. Isaiah gently took Whitebird by the hand and led her to the buffalo robes. Lifting her chin, he gently kissed her and began to undress her by lifting her dress from her bottom and up over her head. He then shucked his buckskins until he was naked with just his moccasins on. He almost fell as he was trying to get them off, causing her to giggle. Her laughter caused her huge breasts to jiggle, something he enjoyed watching, and it had its effect. She knelt down and helped him out of his moccasins, and then had him lie down in the buffalo robes as she removed her moccasins. However, he couldn't wait any longer, for he wanted her. As soon as she had her moccasins off, Isaiah gently wrapped his arms around her, his manhood pressed up against her thighs. He gently turned her around and kissed her again, before picking her up and carrying her to the robes. Unlike Running Moon, who preferred to be on top riding her man like a stallion, Whitebird loved it when Isaiah was on top, slowly stroking her, bringing exquisite pleasure to both of them. They went on an entire night until they both climaxed, and he collapsed on top of her in exhaustion before rolling to the side. She would climb on him and rest her head on his chest, kissing it before looking up to him, and he would kiss her on the forehead and on the lips, before they would go into slumber, while entwined in each other's arms. The next morning, Jacques and his family rode out of the Hidatsa village of Long Time Dog. Following the Missouri River towards St. Louis, Isaiah, Running Moon, and Whitebird, along with the rest of the Hidatsa village, were there to be seen off. Jacques and Pierre promised that they would visit the Barnes family while they were in St. Louis, and let them know he was well. It was the first time in over a year he thought about Emmett Barnes and his family. But he never forgot their kindness to him. Nor would he ever. Chapter 18. Good News and Second Winter. The summer of 1807 passed without a hitch in the Hidatsa village of Long Time Dog. Isaiah, with Whitebird's help, improved his Hidatsa, and before long he was speaking it as fluently as he was speaking Assiniboine. He made many friends among Whitebird's people, including Long Time Dog's youngest son, Red Bull. The warrior was the same age as Isaiah, and he would invite him to go hunting with him and his friends. Catherine Lightshines continued to grow stronger, bigger, and healthy, and was the apple of her parents' eye. Whitebird enjoyed babysitting any chance she could get without fail, even after Good News came around the middle of August. Whitebird had finally gotten her wish. She was pregnant with Isaiah's baby. To say that Isaiah was overjoyed would be an understatement. Running Moon, too, was extremely happy, since Lightshines would have a playmate soon. Jacques Ledoux and his family made it to St. Louis without much difficulty. They avoided the Arikara and Lakota, whose territories they passed through, and managed to trade with the Pawnee along the way. When they reached St. Louis, Jacques and Pierre sold their plues and Isaiah's to the highest bidder. Between the three of them, they had over 800 beaver plues in total. In St. Louis, each plue would get them $5 to $6 a plue, especially if they were in good condition. Jacques managed to find a buyer in none other than Auguste Chateau, the founder of St. Louis. The 59-year-old was also a successful fur trader. He had his own trading house and sold materials to Lewis and Clark for their expedition, and had a successful trade agreement and monopoly with the Osage Indians on the Missouri River in the territory. After he inspected the pelts, he was so impressed with the quality that he offered to pay an enormously generous amount of $10 a plue. That was $8,000 total, resulting in over $2,600 for each man. Jacques and Pierre accepted, sold the Pelouse, and keeping to their word, deposited Isaiah's share into his bank account at the First Bank of St. Louis. While Jacques and Pierre had no use for money on the frontier, they bought what they needed as supplies and food for the 2 trapping seasons for them and Isaiah. After that, they took their women on shopping sprees and showed them around town. After staying with the Barnes family for about a week, they were ready to return to the mountains. The Barnes family requested Jacques to bring Isaiah and his family the next time they came to St. Louis. Jacques said he would try. As the Ledoux left St. Louis a week or so after they sold their Pelouse, they followed the Missouri River, avoiding other human contact for the time being, learning from the last time they came to St. Louis. Taking necessary precautions, they were making at least 20 to 25 miles a day. Shooting Star Woman was beginning to show more, but the hard riding didn't affect or bother her in any manner. They did manage to stop and trade with the Osage Indians. And further west, they came upon the Pawnee again and traded with them without incident. Like before, they avoided the Lakota, whose territory was on the way to the Hidatsa Nation, and they almost ran into an Arikara war party, who were on their way to raid the Lakota. It was either by luck or divine providence that the family avoided them, because Jacques and Pierre had had some run-ins with the tribe before, and neither of them cared to repeat that mistake, especially with their women in tow. By early October, they were at the border of what is now the states of North and South Dakota. Isaiah and Red Bull were hunting one morning when they managed to take down a full-grown buffalo cow. The village was getting ready for the winter, but Isaiah was concerned. He was worried about Jacques and his family and hoped that they didn't run into any trouble in St. Louis or on the way back to the Hidatsa Nation. Whitebird was beginning to show a little, but she continued about her daily duties as did Running Moon. Both women were dutiful in looking after Lightshines. When Isaiah and Red Bull returned to the village with enough buffalo meat to feed 2 families, 5-month-old Catherine Lightshine squealed in delight at the sight of her father. While she could not even talk yet, the baby was extremely bright and was looking around her surroundings and seemed to know who her parents were. After Isaiah washed his hands by the river, he took his daughter from Running Moon and smiled, showing his even white teeth, tickling the little infant, who cooed and giggled in response. Running Moon and Whitebird both sensed that something was bothering their husband.
"Are you well, husband?"
asked Running Moon. Isaiah was amazed at how well the women could read his thoughts, even when he tried to hide his feelings. "I am worried about Jacques and Pierre," he said. "They should have been back by now."
"Maybe they decided to winter there in St. Louis," said Whitebird.
"Doubtful," said Isaiah. "Jacques has never been fond of the place." This was true. The only reason Jacques and Pierre would ever go to St. Louis was to sell their Pelouse and resupply for the upcoming trapping seasons. They would never stay for more than a week or 2. "I hope they didn't run into any trouble on the way there or back," said Isaiah. "Red Bull told me that the Arikara and the Sioux are on the prowl."
"Be a father to your daughter," said Running Moon, "while we tend to the meat."
Running Moon didn't like her husband to worry, neither did Whitebird. They worried about the Ledoux, but they knew the risk and they didn't allow it to bother them as their husband did. While they were preparing the buffalo meat, a rider came in and informed the village that Jacques Ledoux and his family had returned. Running Moon and Whitebird turned around in time to see their husband breathe a sigh of relief. They laughed as they realized they were married to a worrywart. Red Bull and his wife Full Moon had come to help prepare the food when the Ledoux rode in. It was the middle of October and it had been a long ride, but they had made it. Shooting Star Woman was heavy with child, but she didn't seem stressed. Pierre's checking on her from time to time made it easy. The baby was due any time, which everyone could see the moment they arrived in the village, and Pierre helped her down. "Shooting Star Woman," said Isaiah. "You look like you're about to pop."
"That usually happens when you're pregnant,"
responded Shooting Star Woman in mock anger.
"Stupid white man."
"I didn't mean any offense," said Isaiah. He feared that he may have insulted her, until he saw her frown went upside down and he realized she was joking with him. Pierre, his mother, and his sisters had a good laugh at their friend's expense. "So how was St. Louis?" he asked.
"Bigger than last year,"
said Jacques.
More and more people have been moving into the town since Lewis and Clark came back from the West last fall."
"That bothers you?"
"Oui,"
said Jacques.
"I remember when the damn face was nothing more than a frontier post."
The Frenchman just shook his head, not wanting to elaborate any further. He informed Isaiah that the Barnes family had asked about him. "How are they doing?"
They want you to come with us next time we go to St. Louis, said Jacques. Other than that, they are well.
The Frenchman looked at Whitebird and smiled.
It appears a shooting star woman is not the only one to have a baby soon, eh?
Whitebird gently placed her hands on her protruding belly. While it was nowhere near as big as Shooting Star Woman, she was showing. Cypher's Bird Woman and the girls hugged Whitebird to congratulate her, and Jacques and Pierre patted Isaiah on the back for a job well done. Longtime Dog had welcomed back the Ledoux and announced that there would be a feast to celebrate their safe return. Later that night during the feast, Shooting Star Woman went into labor. She was taken to Longtime Dog's lodge, where Cypher's Bird Woman, Running Moon, Whitebird, Full Moon, and the girls attended to her. Pierre was a nervous wreck, and he was not afraid to show it as he walked back and forth outside, sweating like a stuck pig.
Everything is going to be all right, my son, said Jacques. Shooting Star Woman is a good, strong woman. I know, said Pierre. I knew I shouldn't have taken her to Saint Louis. Better her having the baby here than all is well, said Jacques.
Oh, in St. Louis, added Isaiah. Touché, laughed Pierre. So how much did we get for our plumes?
I am glad you asked, said Jacques. 8,000 total, so over 2,600 apiece.
For each of us? Asked the shocked Isaiah.
Oui. We deposited your share into your bank account, said Pierre, as promised.
I had no doubt, smiled Isaiah. At that moment, a baby cried. Cypher's Bird Woman came out of the mound lodge with a huge smile on her face.
I have a grandson,
she shouted in Assiniboine. Jacques and Pierre danced a jig, while Isaiah gently held light shines on his shoulder and just smiled. He knew how happy Pierre was. He was grateful that his own daughter was healthy, and prayed that his baby Whitebird was now carrying would be healthy also.
How is Shooting Star Woman?
asked Pierre in Assiniboine.
She is well, my son,
answered Cypher's Bird Woman.
Go in and see her.
Winter came early on the plains and in the mountains. It was decided that they would winter with the Hidatsa if it was okay with Chief Longtime Dog. Longtime Dog welcomed the Ledoux and the Reinhardts to stay for the winter. Isaiah and Running Moon's time during the winter with Whitebird's people turned out to be extremely valuable, as Jacques expected. Red Bull knew some streams near the Killdeer Mountains full of beaver and happily guided Isaiah, Jacques, and Pierre to where they could find them for the trapping season. Pierre and Shooting Star Woman named their new son Little Bull, giving him the French name Augusta. Shooting Star Woman recovered from her delivery and was up and running with Running Moon, Whitebird, Cypher's Bird Woman, and the girls, skinning and butchering the beaver the men would bring in. The winter trapping season had become a huge success, with Isaiah, Jacques, and Pierre bringing in a total of almost 600 pelts by the end of the season. By this time, winter had come with a vengeance, and the season was over. Chapter 19. Revenge of the Gros Ventre. The winter of 1807 was long and hard, but everyone got through it. When they could, Isaiah, Pierre, and Red Bull would go hunting, and on more than one occasion they would return with moose and buffalo, usually on days when there wasn't a blizzard raging. The extra meat was a welcome sight for the village of Longtime Dog, even though their people had prepared for winter and had dealt with harsh winters like this since the beginning of time. When the spring of 1808 came around, the trio was getting anxious to head back west to the Big Sheep Mountains for the spring trapping season, plus Shooting Star Woman and Running Moon were missing their parents. Shooting Star Woman wanted to present Augusta Little Bull to his grandparents for the first time. Isaiah was a little concerned for Whitebird, though. She was due in April, and he didn't think that riding back to the village of Yellow Wolf was good for her at this time, but she assured him that all would be well and told him to stop worrying too much. They left the Hidatsa village of Chief Longtime Dog on the first day of spring. It took them at least a week to get to the Big Sheep Mountains from the Knife River. To find Yellow Wolf's village would take a little while longer, but no one seemed to be in such a rush. The snow had melted a bit, which had made traveling a lot easier, and made finding grass for the horses and mules no challenge at all either. By the time they reached the foot of the Big Sheep Mountains, they knew that they were home, or close to it. They didn't have far to go in finding Yellow Wolf's people, for a hunting party led by none other than Stalking Bear found them. Isaiah was overjoyed to see his brother-in-law again, as was Running Moon. Stalking Bear got a good look at Lightshines and was impressed at how big his baby niece had grown. She wasn't even a year old yet. "It appears that Lightshines will soon have a playmate," said Stalking Bear in Assiniboine. Whitebird gently put one hand on her belly and smiled. "Next moon," said Isaiah in Assiniboine. "Until then, the grandson of Chief Yellow Wolf will have to do." Stalking Bear almost didn't notice that Pierre and Shooting Star Woman had their baby, and he quickly apologized for the oversight. None was needed, they said, and asked how the chief and the people were doing. "It was a long, hard winter," said Stalking Bear. "But all is well. Your father will be overjoyed to meet his grandson for the first time." Stalking Bear offered to escort them to the village, but Jacques and Isaiah gently declined. After Stalking Bear told them where the village was, they felt an escort was not necessary. They arrived at the village not more than a half an hour later, and they were greeted by many friends and family they had not seen in over a year. To keep up with the protocol, they rode straight to the lodge of Chief Yellow Wolf, who was sitting outside with a smile on his face. When the group stopped, Pierre was the first to climb down, so he could help his wife down from her horse. Their baby was in his cradle, strapped to his mother's back. As soon as she was off the horse, she ran to her father and gave him a hug. "It is good to see you again," said the chief. Pierre gently removed the cradle from Shooting Star Woman's back, and together they presented Augustus Little Bull Ledoux. "The grandson, father," said Pierre. "His name is Little Bull." Yellow Wolf gently took the baby from his cradle and held him high for all to see. He beamed with pride at his new grandson. "You picked a good name," he said. "That I did," said Jacques in Assiniboine. "Stalking Bear told us you had a hard winter." The chief nodded as he held Little Bull in his arms. "The Creator was good to us," he said. "As always. It makes my heart glad that all of you have returned safely. I see you are going to be a father again, Yellow Hair." Isaiah, with one arm around Running Moon and the other arm around Whitebird, smiled and nodded. "Whitebird is due next moon." "This is good," said Yellow Wolf. "Wolf's Paw and Little Feather, come." Isaiah, Running Moon, and Whitebird turned around to meet Running Moon's parents. It was a joyous reunion. Running Moon gave Lightshines to her mother, and the baby squealed in delight as her grandmother lifted her up and touched her nose to nose. "How was your time among the Hidatsa?" asked Wolf's Paw. "It was good," said Isaiah. "Whitebird's people were gracious and kind to us the whole summer." "I see the Lightshines will have a playmate soon," said Wolf's Paw. "Next moon," said Isaiah. "This is good," said Wolf's Paw. "Let's tend to the animals while our women get the lodges up." Jacques, Pierre, and Isaiah had no objections. Yellow Wolf invited them into his lodge to smoke the pipe and talk about the past winter and summer. Inside the lodge, the babies were given back to their mothers, while Yellow Wolf got out his pipe. It had a long stem with a small pipe bowl at the end of it. He put tobacco in it and lit it, and following the customs of his people, pointed to the four winds of Mother Earth. Then he smoked, and they all passed it around in a circle. After the smoking was done, the conversation began about the events of the past year, and one thing that got everyone's attention was a new fort at the mouth of the Yellowstone and Bighorn Rivers that Manuel Lisa built. "We have heard from Mother Assiniboine from other villages about Trader Lisa and his fort," said Yellow Wolf. "Many are not happy that he is trading with our enemies, the Crow, and other tribes of that region." "I am sure we're not the only ones who are unhappy," said Jacques in Assiniboine. "I would wager 100 beaver pelts the Blackfeet will be paying Lisa's fort a visit, and it will not be a social visit." "Since when do the Blackfeet need a reason to make war on anyone?" said Wolf's Paw. "The Gros Ventre for that matter, too." "I have a question," said Isaiah in Assiniboine. "Speak, Yellow Hair," said Yellow Wolf. "Why is there so much fighting between our tribes?" "What do you mean?" "Well, we often trade with the Hidatsa," said Isaiah, "but we fight with the Sioux, Blackfeet, Gros Ventre, and Crow. It seems to be there's no reason for it." "You believe we should make peace with our enemies?" asked Wolf's Paw. "Not just us," said Isaiah, "but all the tribes should come together and make peace with each other." "And why do you think that should happen?" asked Chief Yellow Wolf. As if reading his young friend's mind, Jacques answered for him. Because he believes that more and more white men will come and take advantage of the division and hatred between the tribes. The chief and Wolf's Paw both look at Jacques with a raised eyebrow. The Frenchman raised his own eyebrow at Isaiah. Am I right, mon ami? That is what I'm afraid of, said Isaiah. You believe more and more white men will come? Asked Yellow Wolf. Isaiah nodded. Some are good, like Jacques and myself, but most I fear cannot be trusted. Jacques just laughed. He is wise beyond his years, he said. You agree, Jacques? Asked Wolf's Paw. I do, my friend, answered Jacques. I fear for the Assiniboine and for my family. Maybe not in my lifetime or my children's lifetime, but soon what LeRoy is saying will come to fruition. The chief thought for a moment. He knew what Isaiah was saying made sense, but that was not what concerned him. He somehow knew that stopping the coming of the white man was next to impossible. One had a better chance of roping the wind. What concerned him was being unable to do anything about it. What Isaiah suggested did make sense. If all the tribes in the northern plains at least put aside their differences and came together as one united front, then maybe they could handle the white man on their terms. He knew that wasn't going to happen while the three clans of the Blackfeet were united under one confederacy and were allies of the Gros Ventre. They hated everyone equally, including whites, and Yellow Wolf himself distrusted the Crow and the Sioux more than he distrusted the white man. He knew there were many Assiniboine who felt the same way, but that was the point. Yellow Hair, he said. You really believe that uniting all the tribes will give us a better chance against any white man who comes into our lands? Isaiah nodded. But why would they? Asked Pierre. That is what I don't understand. To take what doesn't belong to them, answered Jacques. The land and everything in it. Before they could continue, there was a commotion outside, and the men went out to see what it was. The hunting party led by Stalking Bear had returned, but something was wrong, terribly wrong. Stalking Bear was holding his side as he dismounted, while some of the hunting party were leading 3 horses carrying a dead warrior each. Isaiah recognized one of the dead as Crowfoot. The Assiniboine warrior had an arrow through his throat as he was bent over his horse. Little Feather went to attend her son as the families of the 3 dead warriors began to wail, mostly the women. What happened, Stalking Bear? Asked Chief Yellow Wolf. Gros Ventre, answered Stalking Bear. They attacked us from the forest while we were hunting.
He is hurt, said Little Feather. His wound must be attended to.
The chief nodded and allowed Little Feather to take her son inside. Now you know why there cannot be peace, he said to Isaiah. The youth just nodded. Running Moon and Whitebird had come to him. They already knew what happened. The former asked if her brother was all right. The wound doesn't appear to be serious, said Wolf's Paw. Your mother is attending to him now. What happens next? Asked Isaiah. We bury our dead, said Chief Yellow Wolf. Then we take our vengeance. I will be coming with you. This isn't your fight, mon ami, said Jacques. Like hell it ain't, responded Isaiah angrily. Stalking Bear is my wife's brother, and I knew Crowfoot. He was a good man. He didn't deserve that. If you must go down this old brother, said Pierre, you know what must be done. I know it. Jacques and Pierre patted Isaiah on the back as they went to get information from Stalking Bear on where the attack occurred. Yellow Hair, said Wolf's Paw. A moment, please. Isaiah and his father-in-law walked some distance to speak in private. No one will think less of you if you choose to not go on the revenge raid, said Wolf's Paw. I say this because I know you do not like killing, even in defense of one's life. Do you also know I don't like scalping, said Isaiah. The Assiniboine elder chuckled. To take another man's life is no small thing, he said, even if it is the life of an enemy. I know, said Isaiah. Stalking Bear is your son. Your daughter is my wife. You are my family. That makes all of you my people. So how can I not ride with you against our enemies? With that, Wolf's Paw smiled and put his hands on his son-in-law's shoulders. I know you don't want Running Moon to be a widow, said Isaiah, but I have to do this. You are going to need all the help you can get. Then let us begin, said Wolfspaw, and teach the Grosventre a lesson they will never forget. Chapter 20. The Loss of a Friend. The next morning, the Assiniboine revenge party, led by Chief Yellow Wolf, left the village. Based off the information of Stalking Bear, the attack by the Grosventre took place near the Redwater River. The survivors from the hunting party took them to the attack site. One warrior named Black Bear was the best tracker in the group, and it didn't take him long to find the Grosventre tracks. The revenge party followed the tracks to their quarry. There were at least over 30 warriors in the revenge party, including Isaiah, Jacques, and Pierre. Technically, this was Isaiah's first revenge raid, and for him it was personal. While he believed in peace and wished for an opportunity for the tribes to unite and come together for the sake of the future, he swore to God and to himself that he would do anything and everything to protect his family, friends, and help fight for his adopted tribe. Jacques Ledoux was proud at how much the youth had learned and how much he had grown up in the past 2 years. He was also proud of his own son, Pierre, who never stopped learning, despite that he was only 2 years older than Isaiah. Jacques felt like he had 2 sons to be proud of instead of 1, but his relationship with Pierre was much, much different than it was with Isaiah, as any father and son relationship should be. Jacques, in a way, envied both Isaiah and Pierre, mainly because he never had a close bond with his own family, let alone his own parents. While Isaiah mentioned his closeness to his parents, and Jacques had a strong bond with Pierre, Lisette, and Marie, and even a stronger bond with his wife, he never talked about his upbringing in Paris, mainly because he had the exact opposite relationship with his family. His father was an abusive tyrant, who never expected much from his youngest son. His mother rarely showed any kind of affection to him, instead expecting nothing but perfection and set high standards for all her children, which Jacques could never live up to, no matter how hard he tried. Jacques' older siblings were nothing more than a bunch of bullies, especially his eldest brother, who would of course inherit the family fortune. They did better in life, but always rubbed it in Jacques' face so much that he began to hate his family. The only people in Jacques Ledoux' young life who showed him any kind of kindness and affection were his teachers and a neighbor who was a retired soldier. This man, who had children of his own, convinced Jacques to go serve his country, which was the best decision the young man ever made. He was only 18 years old at the time, and the rest was history. For the last 25 years, since he left the French army and came out west, Jacques was happier than he had ever been, and was grateful that he was a better husband and father than his own father was. "Are you all right, Papa?" asked Pierre, bringing his father out of his reverie. "Oui," said Jacques, "just remembering." "Remembering what?" "My past, my childhood," said Jacques. "You never told us about your family back in Paris," said Pierre. "I have my besoin, son," said Jacques. "I pray that I was a better father to you and your sisters than mine was to me." Pierre turned sideways on his horse to look at his father. He could see a small tear run down his cheek. The younger Ledoux gently placed a hand on his old man's shoulder and said, "There has never been a better father." And then he rode off and continued in the formation. Isaiah had been listening and smiled at Jacques, as if saying his son was right. The revenge party found what they were looking for. The tracks led them to a Grosventre village near the Musselshell River. Taking out a spyglass, Jacques dismounted and crawled through the grass to get a closer look. Chief Yellow Wolf and Wolf's Paw joined him. "The chocolate is here," he said in Assiniboine. "It is not a big village." "No matter," said Chief Yellow Wolf as he was handed the spyglass. "We take the horses. We will force the warriors out and we can come down on them." "We may have to split up," said Jacques, "or find 2 volunteers willing to go into the horse herd and stampede them." The chief and Wolf's Paw nodded in agreement. They returned to their party and laid down the plan. After hearing the plan, Isaiah and 2 other warriors, Lean Deer and Young Elk, volunteered to stampede the Grosventre horses. It was afternoon when the trio managed to infiltrate the herd. Lean Deer and Young Elk had already killed 2 of the horse guards and took their scalps, while Isaiah managed to sneak past a 3rd guard who was answering nature's call. Isaiah quickly free-mounted one of the horses and shouted a war cry. He was followed by Lean Deer and Young Elk. who also managed to mount bareback on 2 gross ventral horses, and they shouted their war cries, scattering the herd into a frenzy. The 3rd horse guard didn't realize they were intruders until it was too late, and he was stampeded to death before he had the chance to raise the alarm. When the gross ventral realized that the herd had been infiltrated and the intruders were getting away, the warriors sprang into action, and those who had horses of their own quickly mounted and went after the horse thieves. Seeing that their plan was working, Chief Yellow Wolf, Wolfspaw, and Jacques Ledoux signaled the revenge party to get ready. They were going to ambush the gross ventral as they followed Isaiah, Lean Deer, and Young Elk from the village. When a group of 12 mounted gross ventral warriors chased the trio into a gully, that's when the Assiniboines break the trap. Wolfspaw was the first to fire as he unleashed an arrow, hitting the lead gross ventral. The rest of the revenge party followed suit, and then charged into the gully and gave the gross ventral hell. Jacques and Pierre shot down 3 gross ventral while Yellow Wolf took down 2 others, one with a pistol, the other with a tomahawk. 3 of the gross ventral warriors managed to escape the ambush and return to warn the village. By this time, Isaiah, Lean Deer, and Young Elk had joined the melee, and Chief Yellow Wolf led the party toward the village. The 3 escaped gross ventral managed to warn the village, but by that time those warriors that didn't have a horse were already in a blood rage and could see the Assiniboine war party headed towards them. To protect their village, they were willing to lay down their lives, so they went to meet the oncoming war party in the open battlefield. Some of the gross ventral had fuses that they traded for with the Hudson's Bay Company, while most preferred bows and arrows, spears, war clubs, and tomahawks. With the bloodlust up on both sides, the battle increased as the mounted Assiniboine ran over some of the gross ventral defenders. Jacques Ledoux and Wolfspaw had the horses shot from under them. Isaiah saw his father-in-law and friend in trouble and rode toward them. The Assiniboine elder and the Frenchman managed to gain the upper hand against 2 gross ventral, cutting them down. Isaiah shot another gross ventral warrior off his horse and managed to reach Jacques and Wolfspaw. Jacques noticed that the Assiniboine elder was wounded, but not badly.
"Get him out of here!"
he shouted to Isaiah. "Well, what about you?" said Isaiah as he pulled up his father-in-law to ride behind them.
"Don't you worry, mon ami," said Jacques with a smile. "My son comes."
Suddenly, a look of terror came on the face of Isaiah as he looked past Jacques.
"Papa, look out!"
shouted Pierre as he rode his horse at top speed to reach his father. Jacques turned around to find a gross ventral warrior launching his spear right at him. Time appeared to stand still for Isaiah and Wolfspaw.
"No!"
An enraged Pierre took out his war club and with all his fury struck down the gross ventral who impaled his father. Yellow Wolf saw from a distance and immediately rode to his friend. Jacques was still alive, but not for long. The gross ventral had been beaten. Yellow Wolf immediately called for a retreat and some of the warriors to help Jacques on a horse. Succeeding in what they came to do, the Assiniboine revenge party left the area in a hurry, taking most of the gross ventral horses with them. Once they were at a safe distance, they stopped to tend to Jacques, but it was too late. Jacques Ledoux was dead. He was only 45 years old. While the revenge of the gross ventral was a success, the death of Jacques Ledoux was a huge loss. The sun was just setting when Yellow Wolf led the party into the village. It was a solemn mood for everyone. He wanted to break the terrible news to Cypher's Birdwoman, but Pierre felt that it was his responsibility. Jacques' body was wrapped tightly in a buffalo robe and tied to his horse when Cypher's Birdwoman saw it as her son led it towards her. No words needed to be said. Pierre was stoic and tried to be strong for his mother as tears strolled down his cheeks. Lisette and Marie were already weeping at the sight of their father's body as Isaiah and Lean Deer took it from the horse. Cypher's Birdwoman first touched her son's tear-stained cheeks and gently stroked his hair. She knew he was trying to be strong, and she was proud of him for it, as his father would have been proud. Then she walked towards the body of the man she proudly called her husband for 21 summers. She remembered the day they first met as she removed the buffalo robe to uncover his face. That is when she let the tears go as she fell on him, kissing his forehead and weeping. Lisette and Marie joined their mother, screaming and wailing out to their father. Isaiah couldn't take it. His best friend had just died in battle before his eyes, and he thought he was going to lose it. He would have, had Running Moon and White Bird not appeared on each side of him with the baby. No words were said as they pulled him towards the lodge, so he could mourn and weep alone. Jacques Ledoux was given an Assiniboine burial. As he was raised on a funeral scaffold, his family and friends were there. His weapons and personal belongings were buried with him, according to Assiniboine custom. Pierre killed the horse that carried his father's body, so that he could ride it to the happy hunting grounds. Jacques never spoke about his religious beliefs, but he had a great respect for the traditions and beliefs of the Assiniboine. The medicine man, Black Fox, presided over the funeral, chanting and praying to the Great Spirit to be with Jacques Ledoux and guide him to the happy hunting grounds. Isaiah said a silent prayer to God, thanking him for the friend he had in Jacques, and for the 2 years they rode together, trapped together, and fought together, that were the best years of his life. After the funeral, Cypher's Bird Woman and the girls moved in with Pierre and Shooting Star Woman at the latter's insistence. Augusta Little Bull was getting big like Catherine Lightshine's, and the baby looked so much like his grandfather, which brought back some joy into Cypher's Bird Woman's life. One evening, Isaiah, Running Moon, and White Bird came to visit. Cypher's Bird Woman was happy to see them.
"Yellowhair," she said. "They said you were there with him in the end."
"I was," said Isaiah.
"Did he die well?"
Isaiah just nodded. "He shouldn't have died at all. I could have saved him."
"And how could you have saved him, husband?"
said Running Moon.
"My father told me that Jacques told you to take my father onto your horse because he was wounded."
"I should have done something," said Isaiah. "He was my friend."
"And he was my husband," said Cypher's Bird Woman. "It is not your fault that he is gone from this world. It is a way of things, especially in a time of war."
"See us late, Isaiah," said Pierre. "Remember, I was there too. There was nothing anyone could have done."
"Let us remember him as who was," said Cypher's Bird Woman. "A good man, a good husband, a good father, and a good friend."
"He would have wanted to be remembered as such," said Pierre, "as would I." The following month, in the second week of April, White Bird went into labor one afternoon. Isaiah and Pierre had been trapping when she did, so some runners had to be sent from the village to find them. When he got the news, Isaiah immediately, at Pierre's insistence, mounted his horse and rode back to the village as fast as he could. When he had gotten there, White Bird had given birth to a healthy baby boy. After Isaiah was allowed to see her and the child, Running Moon had guided him in, and he got a good look at the baby. Like his sister, Catherine Lightshine's, he was a spitting image of his father, but darker, and his hair was jet black, like an Indian. But he had his father's sky-blue eyes. White Bird was tired, but all right, for the delivery wasn't difficult.
"What do you wish to name your son?"
she asked in Hidatsa. "You mean our son," responded Isaiah. He smiled while in thought, and came up with a name. "His name is Jacques."
"It is a good name,"
said Cypher's Bird Woman.
"What will his Hidatsa name be?"
asked Running Moon. Everyone looked at White Bird for an answer, since she was Hidatsa.
"Black Elk."
"Jacques Black Belt Reinhardt," said Isaiah. "I like it."
"So do I,"
said Running Moon. Isaiah took little Catherine Lightshines from her mother and presented her to her little brother. "Say hello to your baby brother, Lightshines," he said in Assiniboine. The 11-month-old baby girl cooed and smiled at her newborn baby brother, and even gave him a small peck on the cheek, to which her parents laughed and smiled. "I have a great feeling they're going to be excellent playmates," said Isaiah. Chapter 21. Travel Plans. After the birth of Jacques Black Elk, Isaiah and Pierre continued to trap for beaver along the Yellowstone towards the Missouri River during the spring trapping season of 1808. Around the end of May to the first week of June, they talked about whether they should head east to St. Louis to sell their plues, or go west to Manuelisa's fort, called Fort Raymond. Word had reached that the trapping and trading season of last fall and winter as well, as that spring had been profitable for the Spaniard. Isaiah didn't want to risk traveling into Crow country, even though he had nothing personal against the Crows, but he knew the Blackfeet raided the Yellowstone and Bighorn regions constantly. With 2 wives and 2 young babies to think about, he felt it wasn't worth the risk. He thought it best they travel east to St. Louis to sell their plues. They could get a much better price for them in St. Louis than at any of the forts that were now piling up and down the Missouri River. Plus, he wanted to visit the Hidatsa and see his old friend's longtime dog and Red Bull again. Pierre didn't object, and both brought the idea to their wives. They had no problems with the plans either. Especially Running Moon and Whitebird, who had always wanted to visit the white town called St. Louis. Isaiah thought the trip would be good for them and the children since they had never been there. Cypher's Bird Woman and the girls, however, felt they should stay among the people. Lizette and Marie were now of marrying age, and they had a few suitors calling, which didn't sit well with their big brother. However, they agreed that any marriage plans would be put on hold until their brother returned. Now that he was the head of the family, the decision of the girls' future, as far as the marriage went, fell to him. The Assiniboine were a patriarchal society, so the men made all the decisions, but like most tribes in the Northern Plains, the women owned the home. Isaiah and Pierre left with their wives and children around mid-June, following the Yellowstone River north toward the Missouri River, which took them east towards the Knife River area where the Hidatsa villages were. They were well armed, as were their wives, for Shooting Star Woman had 2 pistols, a knife, and a brand new Kentucky rifle her husband bought for her the last time they were in St. Louis. Running Moon and Whitebird had a pistol each and 2 knives each, along with a bow and arrow. They knew how to use a rifle, but they didn't have one yet. Isaiah was planning on getting them one when they got to St. Louis. It had been 2 years since he had been to St. Louis, or anywhere near a white settlement for that matter. He didn't miss it at all, but he was curious at how big the town and the surrounding area had gotten over the past 2 years. Isaiah kept the rear guard to keep a lookout for enemies, while Pierre was in front, and the women, who were pulling the pack animals, were in the middle. It would probably take a week or so to get to the Hidatsa villages, and there were too many dangers that could happen in the meantime. Isaiah knew there would be even more dangers heading down the Missouri towards St. Louis. They were a small group, and he didn't want to take any chances, so every time they stopped the camp, he suggested hunting with a bow and arrow to avoid attracting attention. Pierre didn't disagree with that, and each night he would come back with small game, such as rabbits, quail, and even a few rattlesnakes for dinner. They reached the village of Longtime Dog by the end of the week, and it was a happy reunion between the Hidatsa chief and the friends. Whitebird presented baby Black Elk to the chief, and he held the baby high and beamed with pride. Red Bull greeted Isaiah and Pierre, welcoming them back, but noticed Jacques wasn't with them. "My father has gone to the happy hunting grounds," said Pierre in sign language. Red Bull and his father both frowned at the revelation of the death of Jacques Ledoux. They had nothing but positive memories of the French trapper, and offered their condolences to Pierre, as well as to Isaiah, who they knew was also close to the Frenchman. "How long do you stay?" asked Longtime Dog. "A couple of days," said Isaiah in Hidatsa. "We head east to the white settlements to trade our plues." The chief nodded. Running Moon noticed another white man in the village, and touched Whitebird on the arm to get her attention. Whitebird turned to see who the white man was, and immediately frowned, for she recognized him. Running Moon got Isaiah's attention and pointed to the white man who was heading towards them. "It appears we are not the only visitors here," he said. Pierre recognized the man, and he was the opposite of happy as he cussed in French. "Bonjour, mon ami," said the newcomer. "What you doing here, Charbonneau?" asked Pierre in French. "I live here." Isaiah recognized the name Charbonneau as in Toussaint Charbonneau from the Lewis and Clark expedition. Jacques talked about him plenty of times, and never in a favorable light. "How have you been, Pierre?" asked Charbonneau. "I have been well," answered Pierre. "Allow me to introduce you to Isaiah Reinhardt and his wives, Running Moon of the Assiniboine and Yonder Whitebird." "Oui," said Charbonneau as he shook Isaiah's hand. "You're the one called Yellow Hair?" Isaiah nodded. "Longtime Dog and Red Bull speak very highly of you," said the Frenchman. "I have heard a lot about you as well," said Isaiah. Suddenly, a woman with a baby appeared out of a lodge. Charbonneau signaled her towards him.
This is my wife, Sokotovia, and our son, Jean-Baptiste.
Isaiah and Pierre, along with their wives, greeted the famed Shoshone woman who helped guide the Lewis and Clark expedition. Isaiah and Pierre had heard how she was captured by the Hidatsa as a girl from the Shoshone, and how Charbonneau married her. Whether she married him by choice, or he bought her as a slave or concubine, was up for debate. From what they heard of the Frenchman's reputation, it was probably the latter.
So, mon ami, said Charbonneau, what are your plans?
Why do you wish to know? Asked Pierre. Like his father, he didn't trust Charbonneau, nor did he like him. Isaiah immediately didn't trust the man. There was something about him. Whitebird knew Charbonneau the best, for he had lived among her people and she definitely hated the man, mainly because of how he treated women and his lust for young girls.
Well, I overheard you are going east to St. Louis in a couple of days.
And if we are, said Isaiah.
Would it be possible if my family and I joined you?
Asked Charbonneau.
I have some beaver furs to sell also, and I have some business with Monsieur Clark.
Let's discuss it with our wives, said Isaiah. We'll give you an answer tomorrow.
Magnifique, said the Frenchman. Until tomorrow, come Sokotovia.
As they watched Charbonneau and his family walk off, the women quickly pulled their husbands aside.
You're not seriously considering taking him with us?
Asked Running Moon. We could use the extra hands and guns for protection, said Isaiah.
But who is going to protect us from him? Asked Whitebird. I know Charbonneau. He has an evil heart, and I feel for his wife.
Whitebird speaks the truth, Isaiah, said Pierre. My father had talked with that man a couple of times before, and he nearly had to kill him last time.
Why?
He looked at my mother lustfully. Isaiah gave a hard look in Charbonneau's direction. We may have to leave sooner than a couple of days.
Why?
Asked Running Moon. Because I don't want to have to kill that man while we are here, said Isaiah. Like us, he too was a guest in Longtown Dog's village. The very next morning, a solution to the problem came in the form of an unexpected visitor to the Hidatsa village. Coming down the Missouri River at the mouth of the Knife River tributary was a boat captained by none other than the Spaniard, Manuel Lisa himself. Isaiah, who was going on an early walk with Running Moon and Whitebird, was the first to spot the boat and signaled Lisa to dock after he recognized the man from the shore. By the time Lisa docked the boat, he was greeted by Isaiah and the village of Longtime Dog, who had come out after being told by Whitebird about their presence. After a brief powwow, the Spaniard told Isaiah and Pierre that he was heading downriver to St. Louis to sell his plues and get some supplies for his fort. He offered to buy their plues, but they declined. Instead, they asked Manuel Lisa if they and their families could join them. Lisa didn't seem bothered by such a request. There was plenty of room on the boat, even for the horses and pack animals, and he thought he could use the extra guns for protection from the Araucari.
How soon can you be ready?
Give us an hour, said Isaiah. Lisa nodded and shook both Isaiah's and Pierre's hands. Within the hour, they were on the boat headed to St. Louis. They said their goodbyes to Longtime Dog and many of the friends in the village, except Toussaint Charbonneau, who was sleeping off a hangover. Chapter 22. Blast from the Past. The boat arrived in St. Louis around the middle of July. Isaiah and Pierre thanked Manuel Lisa for allowing them and their families safe passage. As they were unloading their horses and lodges, the Spaniard had an offer for them.
Gentlemen, I am planning on starting a fur company, and I could use some good men to work for me.
We are free suppose, Monsieur Lisa, said Pierre, like my father before us.
All the more reason why I want to hire you, said Lisa. Your reputation, as well as that of your father, is well known to me.
The Spaniard also turned to Isaiah.
I also hear you have grown quite the reputation yourself over these past 2 years, Senor Reinhardt.
They exaggerated, I assure you.
Perhaps, said Lisa. But any trapper whose name is Yellow Hair, and is praised by the Assiniboine and Hidatsa, and even talked about the crows and the Gros Ventre, is someone I wouldn't mind working for me.
The Gros Ventre hate my guts, said Isaiah. And I am not that close with the crows, mainly because I haven't had many run-ins with them.
But you are adopted Assiniboine,
asked the Spaniard.
Hidatsa too, if I recall.
I am, answered Isaiah, but I don't have much sway with them. Running Moon and Whitebird gently tapped his arm.
My father is an elder and sits high on the council, said Running Moon. And Longtime Dog is like an uncle to me, said Whitebird. He thinks very highly of you.
See, said Manuel Lisa. Plus I will give you a fair price for your blues, especially here in St. Louis.
Appreciate the offer, Mr. Lisa, said Isaiah. But we already have a buyer in mind.
Oh?
Auguste Chateau, said Pierre. He bought our blues last year at a very generous price.
Excellent, said Manuel Lisa. I'm going into partnership with his brother Jean-Pierre and his nephew Pierre Jr., along with William Clark and Andrew Henry.
Isaiah's eyes lit up. William Clark, you said? He asked. As in the Lewis and Clark expedition?
That is the one, said Lisa. Would you and your loved ones like to meet him?
Isaiah and Pierre looked at their wives, who had excited looks on their faces. They had heard of the Lewis and Clark expedition when they traveled through their country. Of course we would, said Isaiah. Maybe we should sell you our blues after all.
Manuel Lisa laughed. You want to discuss it with the Chateaus first?
That would be my choice, said Pierre. After meeting the Chateau brothers, who vouched for Manuel Lisa, Isaiah and Pierre sold their blues to him. Between the two of them, they offered 930 Beaufort blues total, all good quality. Manuel Lisa was both surprised and impressed, and like the Auguste Chateau did the previous year, he offered the two men a very generous price of $10 a blue, which was almost unheard of. They were paid $9,300 total, over $4,500 each. That alone was a king's ransom in 1808. Isaiah and Pierre would never have to return west if they didn't want to, since money was worthless out in the frontier. But Pierre Ledoux was born on the frontier, and being half a Cinnabon, neither he nor his wife could ever live in such a white society, no matter how rich. Isaiah had grown accustomed to living in the wilderness, and had no intention of returning to civilization, but he knew having money was necessary, and he wanted to keep it at a bank for the future, for his children. Some reason, deep down, Isaiah knew that the fur trade was not always going to be around, and he needed to prepare his family for an uncertain future. After selling their blues to Manuel Lisa, the Spaniard invited the two trappers and their families to have dinner with him and the Chateaus that evening to discuss business. Jean-Pierre Chateau had already sent an invitation out to William Clark, who was now a brigadier general in the Missouri militia. Jean-Pierre Chateau told them of a nice hotel they could stay at, not far from the First Bank of St. Louis. He wrote them a letter to give to the hotel manager to serve them with their best rooms. Isaiah and Pierre were grateful for Mr. Chateau's kindness, and promised they would be prompt for the occasion that evening. First thing they did was check their animals at a nearby stable, and pay the proprietor to look after them. Then they went to the hotel that Jean-Pierre Chateau described and asked for the manager. This was not the same hotel that Pierre and Shooting Star Woman stayed in the previous summer. This was more elegant. The manager arrived, a well-dressed but portly man with a receding hairline. Isaiah gave him Chateau's letter. After reading it, the gentleman smiled and said, "Any friend of the Chateau's is a friend of mine." He gave Isaiah and Pierre 2 keys to the hotel's finest rooms that adjoined each other. They each gave him a gold coin, which the man gladly took and had the servants bring their belongings to the room. While the women were getting settled with the babies, Isaiah and Pierre stepped out to head down to the First Bank of St. Louis to deposit their money. Pierre remembered that his father had set up a bank account in his name and deposited most of their money in it, while Isaiah had his own bank account. Still dressed in their buckskin clothes, they drew attention from everyone in the bank, but they ignored them as they spoke to the bank owner. Isaiah found he still had $2,666.70 in his account, and added $4,000 to it, totaling $6,666.70, making him a very rich man. Pierre had a combined amount of both his and his late father's money in his account. That amounted to $9,983.40. Both men could live like kings in St. Louis, but they had no intention of doing so. After they left the bank, they returned to the hotel to wash up. Shooting Star Woman was familiar with how whites bathed from her experience the previous year, but Running Moon and Whitebird were curious about these strange things. Not just the tub filled with water and lye soap, but even the beds that white people slept on. It was not like sleeping on the ground in their lodges back home. After they bathed themselves and their children, they dressed up in their native attire. Isaiah looked at himself in the mirror and realized how long his blonde hair had grown, and how thick his same-colored beard had become over the past 2 years. And he was just 18 years old. He figured he could use a haircut and the beard could use a trim. Pierre didn't care much about his hair. He always kept it braided a Cinnabon style, and he did develop a small mustache. After everyone was dressed, they did a little sightseeing. "Your father was right," said Isaiah. "St. Louis has gotten bigger." "It wasn't this big last year," said Pierre. While they left their rifles in their rooms, they were still armed to the teeth with their pistols and knives, just to be on the safe side. St. Louis still had many dangers from ruffians, thieves, and corrupt people in power. They stopped at a barber, where Isaiah got a trim of his beard and haircut. His wives and even Shooting Star Woman stood there in shock at his transformation. It had been a long time since Running Moon had seen her husband like that, for she remembered when his hair was short. Whitebird had never seen Isaiah with his haircut before. It was like she was seeing a different man for the first time. When they went outside, Isaiah and Pierre remembered the first time they met. "I think we have time to visit an old friend," said Isaiah. Pierre smiled and nodded. They went to the docks to visit Emmett Barnes' tavern. Isaiah laughed since the place hasn't changed in 2 years. When they entered the establishment, a black man serving a patron his whiskey immediately recognized the duo. Talbot smiled as Isaiah approached the bar. "Good to see you again, old friend." "I'm glad you two are still alive," said Talbot. "We don't allow babies in here, though." "Any suggestions?" The black man smiled, showing his even white teeth. "Wait outside for a moment," he said. "Emmett Jr. will be with you." Less than a minute later, Emmett Barnes Jr., followed by Talbot, came outside and greeted Pierre and Isaiah, giving the latter a huge bear hug. "I thought we would never see you again." "It is good to see old friends," said Isaiah. "How is your father doing?" "He's been under the weather for the past couple of days," said Emmett Jr. "My brothers and I have been running the business while he convalesces at home." Isaiah introduced Running Moon, Whitebird, and the babies to the younger Barnes and Talbot, whose hearts both melted. "Got married early this year," said the former. "Hopefully the good Lord will give us children soon." "Congratulations, mon ami," said Pierre. "Who is a lucky mademoiselle?" "Her name is Barbara," said Emmett. "Barbara Banks." Isaiah patted the younger Barnes on the back and promised that he and Pierre would stop by later in the week. They told him about their meeting with Manuelisa in the chateaus and having dinner with them later that evening. Emma Jr. wished them well and told them he would be expecting them. "One more thing," he said. "Are you by any chance related to a Philip and Malachi Reinhardt?" "I have 2 older brothers by those names," said a surprised Isaiah. "Why?" "We bought a couple of horses from 2 brothers with those names this past spring," said Emmett Jr. "They own a horse breeding farm on the outskirts of town." Isaiah's eyes lit up. "Are they from South Carolina?" "I think they are," said Emmett. "The older one is married with a son." Chapter 23. Family Reunion. "It can't be," Isaiah thought as he, Pierre, and the women left the tavern to head back to the hotel. Emma Jr. had described what the horse breeding farm looked like, and had given directions to it. It was already late in the afternoon, so Isaiah decided he would visit the farm later. He and Pierre had a business dinner to keep, plus a chance of meeting William Clark was too much of an opportunity to pass up. They arrived at Manuelisa's home around 7:30 that evening, greeted by his black servants who escorted them to the living room, where the host and the chateaus were waiting. "Welcome, my friends," said Lisa. "Allow me to introduce you to my wife, Polly." Polly Lisa was beautiful in her own way, thought Isaiah. He and Pierre bowed, while Running Moon, Whitebird, and Shooting Star Woman, still holding their babies, curtsied, taught to them by their husbands for how whites greeted each other in polite society. Jean-Pierre Chateau introduced his wife, Miss Bridget Saucier Chateau, who gave a genuine smile and curtsy to the 2 trappers and their wives. She beamed at the babies and asked the mothers if she could hold one. The women nor their husbands had any objections to the request, as Mrs. Chateau first took Catherine Lightshines in her arms, who was now about a year old.
"Our son Pharamond is about this little one's age," she said. "They grow too fast."
"That is the point of having children," said Jean-Pierre Chateau. You must forgive my wife. She have a soft spot for babies. How many do you have, Monsieur Chateau? Asked Isaiah. 4 for my first marriage, in which Pierre Jr. is my second eldest, and 3 with Brigitte, who, as you can see, is expecting another one in the spring. Pierre Chateau Jr. was a year older than Isaiah, and had followed in his father's footsteps by becoming a fur trader, establishing an agreement with the Osage tribe at the age of 15. He greeted Isaiah and Pierre Ledoux shortly after arriving, apologizing to his father and Manuelisa for his tardiness. Monsieur Reinhardt, he said, are you by any chance related to Philip and Malachi Reinhardt, who own a horse-breeding business? You're the second person to ask me that question, said Isaiah. I have 2 older brothers with those names, but the last I saw them was when I left South Carolina. The Chateau's eyes lit up. Those 2 gentlemen moved here from South Carolina last fall, said Jean-Pierre. Their horse-breeding business is quite lucrative. Well, I plan on visiting their farm in the morning, said Isaiah. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. And if it isn't, said Manuelisa, what a joyous family reunion it will be. Isaiah's expression was indifferent. Pierre and the women gave a slight smile, but they were concerned for Isaiah. They knew why he left South Carolina, and if Philip was living in St. Louis, had he forgiven him for his betrayal? 2 years was a long time to carry a grudge against one's brother. At that moment, William Clark made his entrance into the living room, escorted by his bride of almost 8 months, Julia Hancock Clark. After dinner was served, Clark regaled his adventures of the expedition with the Corps Discovery to Isaiah and Pierre. He informed Pierre that he regretted the fact that neither he nor his partner or friend, Meriwether Lewis, met with the Assiniboine, but told him that Lewis did share his father's distrust and dislike for Toussaint Charbonneau. The men laughed as the women got to know each other, playing with their babies. Mrs. Chateau, Lisa, and Clark were curious about Shooting Star Woman, Running Moon, and Whitebird's people, and were impressed at how well the 3 women spoke English. However, what caught Isaiah's eyes were the Negro servants. While he was born and raised in South Carolina, and some of his older siblings had married into slave-owning families, Isaiah Reinhardt never subscribed to the practice of slavery. Both of his parents never supported it either, and he remembered how his father had hired free Negroes to work in a shipbuilding plant back in Beaufort. Isaiah and Pierre had met York, William Clark's slave who accompanied him on the expedition west, and while Clark hadn't openly abused a man in front of everyone, Isaiah could tell that York was miserable. While the issue of slavery never came up, William Clark told Isaiah how valuable York was with Whitebird's people in the expedition. When Isaiah managed to excuse himself, he pulled York aside and asked him about his situation. Massa Clark promised me my freedom after we returned from the West 2 years ago, said York. I can see he hasn't kept that promise, said Isaiah. How does he treat you? York wasn't sure how to answer that question, but Isaiah assured him that he would be trusted. This is between us, York, he said. You have my word on that. He's an asshole, said York. Both men chuckled as Isaiah shook his head. Get free of him as soon as you can, said Isaiah. Return west when you do. For any man, black or white, can be his own man and live in true freedom. The black explorer and slave smiled with even white teeth. That was my plan all along. Isaiah sympathized with the man, but there was little he could do. He had his family to think about, but if he could have freed York or helped him escape from William Clark, he would have. He said a silent prayer for the man and hoped that he would get free. After an eventful evening, Isaiah and Pierre and their families left the Lisa home around midnight. The children were sound asleep when they got back to the hotel. As they were heading up the stairs, Isaiah noticed someone out of the shadows approaching them. Fearing for the safety of his loved ones, he immediately pulled out his pistol, but the stranger quickly put his hands up. I mean you no harm, shouted the stranger who had a southern accent with a bit of German-Irish twang to it. Isaiah immediately recognized his older brother Malachi as he lowered the pistol. Malachi? Is that you? It's me, little brother. The 2 brothers embraced for the first time in 2 years. Pierre and the women looked at each other and then back at the 2 men who looked so different. It was hard to believe that they were brothers. Malachi Reinhardt had black hair and was not as stocky and barrel-chested as Isaiah. He was taller, but much skinnier. So it is true, said Isaiah. You do live in St. Louis. How did you find me? Emmett Barnes, said Malachi. I stopped at his tavern and he told me about you, saying you were staying here. Tears were streaming down the cheeks of both men at this time, as Malachi explained how he heard of a yellow-haired white trapper from South Carolina, with 2 Indian wives and a mixed-blood partner, having dinner with Manuelisa and Jean-Pierre Chouteau. After they went upstairs to their rooms, Isaiah quickly introduced Pierre Ledoux, his best friend, and their wives and children. Malachi was amazed that his brother had 2 wives as he met Running Moon and Whitebird. I can't wait to explain this to Ma and Pa tomorrow. They're here? Asked Isaiah. In St. Louis. Malachi nodded. They're visiting, along with Micah and Manoah. How are Philip and Annabelle? Asked Isaiah. He's changed, brother, answered Malachi. Marriage and fatherhood has changed him for the better. So they did marry. They did, said Malachi. They're good parents with a son. What is his name? Asked Isaiah. They named him after you, answered Malachi. They feel real bad about what happened. Even though Annabelle never stopped loving you, she is happy with Philip, finished Isaiah. I am happy for them both and no longer angry with them. I can see why, laughed Malachi. 2 wives? It's a long story, said Isaiah, but I have no regrets. Come to the farm tomorrow and you can tell us everything. You sure about that? Asked Isaiah. It would mean a lot to Ma and Pa, said Malachi. To see you again and meet their grandchildren.
We will be there, said Running Moon. I wish to meet the family I owe my happiness to. As do I, added Whitebird.
Looks like we'll be there, said Isaiah with a smile. It's settled then, said Malachi. Running Moon, Whitebird, welcome to the family. Malachi gave his 2 sisters-in-law a huge hug and gently kissed Catherine Lightshines and Jacques Black Elk on their foreheads. He shook hands with Pierre and Shooting Star Woman and gave Augusta Little Bull a soft touch on his nose before he bid everyone good night. The next morning after breakfast, Malachi returned to the hotel to pick up Isaiah and his family to take him to the farm, which is on the outskirts of town. Malachi, who was still a bachelor at 21, shared the farm with Philip and Annabelle. He was saving up his share of the proceeds he and Philip made from breeding horses, which were becoming a valuable commodity among St. Louis's rich elite and many of the trappers and fur traders from the West. When they arrived at the estate, Isaiah realized that it wasn't as fancy or elegant as the home they grew up in back in South Carolina, but it was more modest, which surprised him, considering that he remembered Philip having big dreams. Maybe the man had changed, as Malachi said. The carriage stopped out front, and Malachi instructed Isaiah, Pierre, and the women to wait there. They don't know you're coming. I wanted it to be a surprise. You always want for surprises, laughed Isaiah. Malachi jumped off the carriage as 2 young men were exiting the house. Who are they, Malachi? Asked one of the young men. The surprise, Manoah, said Malachi. Mama, Papa, Philip, Annabelle, come quick. My surprise is here. Malachi returned from inside, followed by his older brother, their parents, and Annabelle, who was gently pulling a little boy who looked to be almost 2. Seeing his parents for the first time in 2 years, Isaiah could no longer contain himself as he gently opened the carriage door and hopped out. Isaac and Catherine Reinhardt, who both looked like they had not aged much in the past 2 years, stood there in shock for a moment. Then Catherine screamed as she ran to her long-lost son, hugging him as tears streamed down her cheeks, flowing like a river. It's me, Mama, he said. I am here. Isaac joined them, wrapping his giant arms around them both as he welcomed his son back in his life. Let me look at you, said Isaac in German. Our son has become a man. That more, Papa, said Isaiah. By this time, Malachi had helped Running Moon and Whitebird out of the carriage, as they were holding their babies. Mama, Papa, said Isaiah, these are my wives, Running Moon and Whitebird.
2 wives,
said a shocked Catherine, who couldn't believe that her son had married not 1 but 2 Indian women.
Is such a thing even legal?
Isaac was different. Welcome, he said. My daughters. Running Moon and Whitebird were almost intimidated by the giant, who was their father-in-law, but Isaiah speaking to them in Assiniboine and Hidatsa put their minds at ease, as they allowed Isaac to hug them, and he kissed them each on their forehead.
We greet our husband's father with great joy, said Running Moon.
The joy is all mine, said Isaac.
At that moment, Catherine Lightshines was pulling on Isaac's beard, and when he saw her and her brother for the first time, his heart melted.
I assume that these are my grandchildren.
Both women nodded as they presented Catherine Lightshines and Jacques Black Elk to their grandfather, who scooped them up in their arms.
Look, Catherine, said Isaac to his wife, our new grandchildren.
Whatever prejudice Catherine O'Keefe Reinhardt had was washed away at the sight of these two little ones who were his grandkids. She approached her husband as she touched the little girl and could tell she was a year old, going on 2. She then looked at Black Elk in the eyes of their grandfather.
They both look like you, Isaac,
she said in her thick Irish brogue.
They better, said Isaiah. They're your grandchildren.
Catherine then looked at Running Moon and Whitebird again, and did her best to destroy whatever prejudice she had against Indians. She sensed that these were good women who loved her son, and if he was happy, who was she to judge or say otherwise? She hugged them both and welcomed them into the family.
"We'll have much to discuss,"
she said to them and to Isaiah.
"We do, Mama," said Isaiah. "But first, let me introduce you to my best friend, Pierre Ledoux, and his wife, Shooting Star Woman, and their son, Augusta Little Bull."
"It is a pleasure to meet you both, Madame and Monsieur Reinhardt," said Pierre.
"The pleasure is all ours,"
said Isaac, who gave baby Jacques to Catherine so he could shake Pierre's hand.
"You are French, are you not?"
"My father," said Pierre. "My mother is a Cinnabon, as is my wife and my son." The elder Reinhardt was impressed.
"I served with the French at the Battle of Yorktown during the Revolutionary War." "As did my father," said Pierre. "He served in the French army before his discharge and coming out west to be a trapper." "How exciting," said Malachi. "You must tell us this after you meet the rest of the family."
Isaiah was hugging Micah and Manoah, both 15 and 13 years old respectively, and were happy and excited to hear the adventures of the long-lost brother. But the people who were still silent and hung their heads were Philip and Annabelle, the two reasons why Isaiah left Beaufort in the first place. Isaac, Catherine, and Malachi could feel the tension return as Isaiah approached his estranged brother and his former lover.
"Hello, brother," he said. "It is good to see you and Annabelle again."
Philip raised his head and was surprised to see his younger brother, who he betrayed, extend his hand towards him. Philip gave a slight smile and responded with a hug. 2 years of pain had been washed away by forgiveness. The tears came falling down Catherine's cheeks as she continued to hold her grandson. She was not alone. Annabelle was weeping as well, seeing the man she once loved, but also betrayed, forgiving his brother. She believed a man can never forgive a woman, so she turned to go back into the house, but Isaiah called to her.
"You're not going to hug an old friend and introduce me to your baby boy?"
Annabelle turned around and could see forgiveness in Isaiah's eyes as he walked up to her and gave her a hug. She held him tightly and whispered how sorry she was about everything.
"The past is the past," responded Isaiah. "All is forgiven."
He released her for a moment to see his nephew.
"This must be Isaiah."
"It is," said Philip. The little tyke hid behind his mother's dress until she encouraged him to meet his uncle. Isaiah knelt down to pick him up and noticed how much he looked like his father and grandfather.
"He is a Reinhardt."
Isaiah introduced Running Moon and Whitebird to Philip and Annabelle, and both were surprised and curious about how he ended up having 2 wives.
"It's a long story."
"You can explain to us inside," said Philip. He invited everyone inside the house after all the introductions were made. This is going to be one joyous family reunion, as Manuel Lisa predicted the night before. Chapter 24. Going Home. As everyone was getting settled down in the living room, Isaiah recalled his adventures over the past 2 years. From meeting with Pierre and his father Jacques, to killing his first man, to hunting buffalo and seeing the Rocky Mountains for the first time. The way he explained it to everyone, it sounded like a peaceful Garden of Eden.
"The West is a Garden of Eden," he said, "but it is far from peaceful."
"Well, how so?" asked Micah, who was now 15 years and almost as tall as his brothers.
"There are many dangers out west," said Isaiah. "Starvation, Floods, accidents, blizzards, anything Mother Nature throws at you, and that is just the elements.
Don't forget dangerous animals, said Pierre as he held Augusta in his arms.
I was just about to get to that, Pierre.
Philip noticed a grizzly bear necklace around Isaiah's neck and pointed to it.
Grizzly bear, Isaiah confirmed. On its hind legs, it can't reach the ceiling of this living room.
Sweet Jesus! Exclaimed Catherine. She and the family had seen plenty of bears back in South Carolina, but not as huge as Isaiah just claimed the grizzly bear can get. Have you been on raids, Isaiah? Asked Micah. Have you taken scalps? Asked Manoah. Boys, shouted Isaac, don't pester your brother and his friends with such rude questions.
It is all right, Papa, said Isaiah. And to answer your questions, little brothers, yes, I have been on raids and taken scalps.
Don't you think that is a little barbaric? Asked Annabelle. She was shocked at the revelation that he participated in the practice of scalp taking, and she wasn't alone. Isaac and Catherine were just wondering what kind of man their son had turned into in the last 2 years.
Do I think it is barbaric? Said Isaiah. Yes, I do. But to the Indian way of thinking, it is a part of their world when it comes to defeating an enemy.
How so? Asked Malachi.
He was intrigued just like his youngest brothers were. Well, in battle, killing an enemy is not enough, said Isaiah. Many tribes believe that to keep their enemy from reaching the happy hunting grounds or afterlife, you have to mutilate their bodies. Scalp taking is just one of those ways.
Interesting, said Isaac. As a veteran of the Revolutionary War, he had seen atrocities committed on both sides in the heat of battle. Even though he didn't approve of it, he understood it.
You really don't believe in any of that nonsense, do you, Isaiah? Asked Philip. Isaiah just smiled at his older brother. Maybe I do, and maybe I don't, said Isaiah. Either way, I am not about to judge another race or culture by our standards.
Have you killed white men? Asked Catherine.
The first men I killed were white men, Mother, answered Isaiah. First scalps I took were from white men as well.
Catherine tried her best to hide her horror at her son's answer, to no avail. I am sure he had his reasons, Catherine, said Isaac, wanting to change the subject.
I did, Papa, said Isaiah. The first 2 white men I killed were trying to kill Pierre and his father right here in St. Louis.
The authorities allowed you to take their scalps here in St. Louis?
Asked the shocked Philip. Pierre and Isaiah both laughed.
No, we took those scalps off 3 white men that tried to bushwhack us on the way west to the Rockies.
During lunch, it was a solemn but celebratory mood. Catherine and Annabelle were getting to know Running Moon, Whitebird, and Shooting Star Woman, while Isaac with light shines on his lap was feeding her a small piece of turkey. Despite her teeth coming in months before, Running Moon continued to breastfeed her, but she was eating solid foods and took to the white man's food naturally. Malachi, who had a love for babies, held Augusta Littlebowl gently in his lap who, like Catherine Lightshines, missed nothing when it came to their surroundings. Micah and Manoah continued to ask Isaiah and Pierre questions about the West and the tribes who lived there, until their parents finally told them to be quiet and eat. Isaiah just shook his head and chuckled, remembering how he was just like them 2 years before. He sensed Philip had wanted to ask him something, but was hesitant. He didn't press his brother. Whatever Philip wanted to ask him, he would ask him in his own good time. After lunch, Philip and Malachi decided to give everyone a tour of the ranch where they bred the horses. Isaiah and Pierre and their wives were impressed. The horses were beautiful and looked to be of strong stock. That is when Philip asked his question.
What are your intentions, Isaiah? What do you mean?
Will you head back west, stay here in St. Louis? Asked Philip. Or go home to South Carolina with Mama and Papa? For Isaiah, there was only one answer.
Head back west to the Rockies, he said. That is our home now.
Isaiah could hear the painful sigh of his parents behind him. He knew that was not what they wanted to hear. Why can't you stay and live here? Asked Annabelle. Isaiah was surprised by her question, and he wasn't the only one. Running Moon and Whitebird, along with Philip, were a little tense. Did Annabelle still have feelings for Isaiah? You have family here, where at least Mother and Papa Reinhardt can come visit.
Even if I wanted to stay and live in St. Louis, it would be impossible, said Isaiah. My wives and children would never survive here, and we all know that.
They're family, Isaiah, said Philip. And when I mean family, that includes you and your family too, Pierre.
Merci beaucoup, said Pierre.
It would mean a lot, not to just me, said Philip, but to Mama and Papa as well.
You really want us to stay?
Philip nodded. Isaiah, I know I have done things that I am not proud of, he said. But God has given me, us, a second chance at being a family.
Never took you for the religious type, Philip.
Philip just laughed. You would be surprised at what marriage and fatherhood can do to a man.
Malachi was right, said Isaiah. You really have changed.
But we still cannot stay.
Why not?
Asked Catherine. Isaiah could see tears running down her cheek. She was just getting to know her grandchildren and her 2 daughter-in-laws. Even though she did not approve of her son having 2 wives, she still loved him and them.
Don't tell me you really want to move back to the wilderness.
That is where I belong, said Isaiah. Where we belong.
What about the children? Asked Catherine. You said so yourself that out west you were in constant danger.
But at least I can protect my family there, said Isaiah. And at least I know where I stand among the tribes.
He is right, Catherine, said Isaac. They wouldn't be tolerated here or in South Carolina.
Catherine was about to say something, but her husband just raised his hand, which silenced her.
Isaiah is a man now with his own family to think about, and as such, he has to think what is best for them.
After much thought, Catherine just sighed and hugged Isaiah. It was hard for a parent to let go. She turned to Running Moon and Whitebird and hugged both of them, tears still flowing down her cheeks. Philip just walked to Isaiah and said, I would definitely like little Isaiah to get to know his uncle and cousins.
I appreciate it, said Isaiah.
I would like that as well. The next few days were eventful for Isaiah's family. Catherine, Annabelle, Running Moon, Whitebird, and Shooting Star Woman took the babies and went shopping for clothes in town. Seeing how white women dress, the wives of Isaiah and Pierre were curious and excited at trying on white women's clothes. When Catherine had them try on nice dresses, the women giggled as they looked at themselves in the mirror for the first time. They liked what they saw and imagined wearing such a dress among their own people. While the women were out shopping, Isaiah, Pierre, Isaac, Micah, and Manoah went to visit the Barnes family. Emmett Barnes Sr. had recovered from his cold, and he and his family were overjoyed to see Isaiah again and meet his father and brothers. He invited the entire family to dinner that evening, which Isaiah accepted. When Isaiah and Pierre saw their wives in their new dresses that Catherine had bought them, they were ecstatic. The women looked completely different. If they didn't know they were Indian, they could pass for white women in so-called polite white society. Both men loved what they saw in their wives, and they let them know it. The Reinhardts and the Ledoux had an eventful dinner at the Barneses that evening, regaling their adventures of the West. Emmett Sr. was saddened to hear the death of Jacques, for he considered the French trapper a very good friend. After he offered his condolences to Pierre, Pierre informed him that Isaiah and Whitebird named their son Jacques Black Elk, after his father. Isaiah presented the baby to the elder Barnes, who held him up high and smiled.
I see a lot of you in him, Isaiah, he said. Raise him well.
Thank you, Emmett, said Isaiah. We will. About a week later, Isaiah, Pierre, and their wives were getting homesick, and it was time to go. August had just arrived, and after checking out of their hotel and picking up their horses, they ran into none other than Manuelisa.
My friends, it is good to see you again, said the Spaniard.
Likewise, said Isaiah. We're heading back west today.
Excellent. I am willing to sell you supplies at a reasonable price, said Lisa. I trust you and your wives enjoyed your stay in St. Louis.
We did, said Isaiah. My brothers, Philip and Malachi, live here now, running a horse breeding business.
Aha!
Exclaimed Lisa.
So I was right.
Isaiah just chuckled and nodded. If you and your partners need good horses for your fur trading company, I will put in a good word for you to my brothers.
I would appreciate that, said Manuelisa. We would be indebted to you.
How is that new company of yours going, anyway? Asked Pierre.
We're getting all the paperwork and licensing together right now as we speak, said Manuelisa. We are calling it the Missouri Fur Company.
Isaiah was impressed.
Makes sense, he said. since this is Missouri territory.
When do you leave? Asked Pierre.
I am returning to Fort Raymond in the spring, said Lisa. I hope to see you gentlemen there safe and sound.
Possibly, said Isaiah. God willing. After buying their supplies from Manuel Lisa, Isaiah and Pierre stopped at the Barnes family farm to say their farewells before returning to Isaiah's bloodkin to say goodbye to them. As they stood at Philip and Malachi's ranch to say their farewells, the situation was hard on Catherine, who had gotten to know her grandchildren and their mothers very well. She held Catherine Lightshine and Jacques Black Elk to her bosom for a long moment, before giving them back to their mothers. She kissed Augusta Littlebull on his forehead, before telling all three women to raise them well. Isaiah was shaking hands with his father and brothers, saying goodbye was hard on them as well. Micah and Manoah wished they could go west with Isaiah and Pierre, but they knew that their parents would not allow that.
I really wish you would stay, said Philip. I feel a weight has been lifted off my shoulders since your return.
Same here, big brother, said Isaiah. Annabelle, you take good care of my brother and my little namesake here.
Isaiah picked up his nephew and held him up high, as the little tyke squealed in delight, before his uncle gave him back to his parents. Isaac shook hands with Pierre, thanking him for his friendship to his son.
No man is more worthy of it, said Pierre.
Isaac then turned to Running Moon, White Bird, and Shooting Star Woman.
"Do you ladies take good care of these men?" he said. "We men can be very stubborn sometimes."
"Speak for yourself, Papa," said Malachi.
With that, everyone had a good laugh, as Isaiah and Pierre helped their wives mount up, and they followed before saying a final goodbye to Isaiah's bloodkin. As they rode out of St. Louis, Pierre rode up next to his friend.
"Where to, mon ami?"
"Home," said Isaiah, "or where the wind takes us." Epilogue. It was the first week of September. The Reinhardt and the Ledoux families had already reached the tributary of the Heart River, which flowed into the Missouri River. They had followed the Great Missouri all the way from St. Louis, traveling at least 20 miles a day. Isaiah and Pierre hunted buffalo and antelope each time they camped, but they had to be extra careful. Through the entire journey, they traveled through the territories of Lakota and the Pawnee, tribes that are both enemies to the Assiniboine and the Hidatsa. They were near what is now today Bismarck, North Dakota, so they were in the land of the Hidatsa and the Mandan. They still had to be on the lookout for the Arikara. Even though that tribe often traded with both tribes, they weren't historically allies. Whitebird automatically recognized the area, for she had often visited the Heart River when she was a child.
"We are not far from my people," she said. "Chief Longtime Dog's village is about a day away."
"It would be nice to spend more time among the Hidatsa," said Isaiah. "I am anxious to get back to the Big Sheep Mountains again."
"Patience, husband,"
said Running Moon. She missed her people also and was anxious to get back to them. But she had considered Whitebird's people, her uncle in particular, family as well. Catherine Lightshines rode in front of her mother, who held her tightly in the saddle. Tiny Tot wanted to ride with her father and squealed her disappointment, as her mother held her close. Isaiah rode next to them and gave his daughter a peck on the cheek, and gently tickled her. He had been amazed that at only a year old, she managed to ride well with her mother without complaint. Running Moon continued to breastfeed her when she was hungry, but she was eating more and more solid foods. Jacques Black Elk was still a few months old and was too young to start eating solid foods. The Whitebird started to feel teeth growing, as he suckled from her breast. She knew that she would have to start feeding him solid food as well. Pierre noticed that his son was getting big fast too, being a couple of months older than Isaiah and Whitebird's baby. He noticed that he and Shooting Star Woman would have to start feeding him solid food soon. The two men were riding when they spotted a herd of buffalo and a hunting party as well. Everyone was concerned. They had managed to avoid human contact, both white and red, during the entire journey since leaving Missouri Territory, and they weren't sure which tribe this hunting party came from. Before anyone moved, they were spotted.
"Can you tell what tribe they are?" asked Isaiah.
"I am hoping Hidatsa," said Pierre, or Mandan. The hunting party approached the two families. Isaiah and Pierre rode in front of their wives to greet the party, and quickly realized they were Hidatsa as they approached. Isaiah automatically recognized Red Bull and smiled.
"It is good to see you again, Red Bull.
he said in Hidatsa. The young warrior smiled. Welcome back, Yellow Hair, he responded. It is good to see you again as well, Pierre. I am happy that the Great Spirit has protected you and your families. Pierre nodded and smiled. Isaiah signaled Whitebird and Running Moon forward, while Pierre did the same to Shooting Star Woman.
How is my uncle Longtime Dog? Asked Whitebird.
He is well, said Red Bull.
And Full Moon?
Said Running Moon and Hidatsa. Going to have my child next spring, said Red Bull with a grin. Everyone whooped and hollered as they congratulated the Hidatsa warrior. Come, he said. We have camped not far from here, and tomorrow we will escort you back to our village on the Knife River. We'll lead the way, old friend, said Isaiah. Later that evening, at dinner, Isaiah sat with Catherine Lightshines in his lap. He was in deep thought as he played with his eldest child. He watched Whitebird finish suckling Jacques Black Elk as she sat next to him on his left, and he beamed proudly. As if reading her husband's mind, Running Moon gently laid her head on his shoulder, as she sat next to him on his right.
What are you thinking about, husband? She asked.
Isaiah looked at both his wives as he pondered before answering. Just thinking about my family back east, he said, and my family here. Whitebird looked at her husband.
You miss them, she said.
Isaiah knew that was a statement and not a question. I do, but I am happy here, he said, with the two of you and our children. Both women smiled and felt the same kind of happiness that he had being with them.
You gave up everything for us, said Running Moon. I don't believe your mother was truly happy that you had 2 wives, but I know she loves us all the same.
She would have grown accustomed to you both, said Isaiah. It's everyone else that I was worried about.
This is why you didn't want to stay in St. Louis? Asked Whitebird. We'll move back to South Carolina?
Isaiah nodded. You and the children would not be safe nor happy there. At least out here, mon ami, said Pierre. You can protect your family and you know where you stand. Pierre and Shooting Star Woman sat not far from Isaiah and his wives, and the young trapper thought about what his friend just said. I doubt it will make much difference, though, he said. More and more white men will come, and they will bring their so-called civilization and its rules with them. A look of sadness and concern came on Pierre's face. That spells trouble for my mother's people and the Hadassah. That will be trouble for all the tribes out here, said Isaiah. Your father knew this, and we discussed it with Yellow Wolf in the council. He told me about it before he died, said Pierre. I miss your father very much, said Isaiah. You're not alone, mon ami, said Pierre. He would be very proud of you. Because? Asked Isaiah with a questionable look. You have come a long way in just 2 short years, mon ami, answered Pierre. I remember the day we first met you. Now look at you. Successful trapper and a devoted husband to 2 beautiful women, eh? Everyone chuckled as Isaiah rocked Catherine Lightshines to sleep. You shouldn't worry about what will happen tomorrow, said Pierre. Focus on what is going on right now, and let tomorrow take care of itself. You sound like your father, said Isaiah. Merci beaucoup, mon ami, said Pierre. I take it as a compliment. He is right, my husband, said Running Moon. You should think about the here and now. And how you have been blessed, added Whitebird. Isaiah smiled at both his wives and friends. He leaned over to Whitebird and kissed his baby boy on the forehead. Then he kissed both of his wives and wrapped his arms around both of them, after he gave a now sleeping Catherine Lightshines back to her mother. I truly am blessed, he said. I have come a very long way. This concludes Where the Wind Takes You by LeRoy A. Peters. Copyright by LeRoy A. Peters and published by Dusty Saddle Publishing, a division of DS Productions.
We hope you have enjoyed this story. You can find many more books by LeRoy Peters on Amazon, available for Kindle and in paperback. This story has been brought to you by Dusty Saddles Publishing, home of the best-selling authors in the Western genre. Visit our website at dspublishingnetwork.com. Please hit the subscribe button and leave us a comment if you've enjoyed listening to this story. Till next time, happy trails.